Hey, it's Marilla Manelli and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to show you how to add in some highlights and lowlights specifically on really fine thin hair so that way we can give the illusion of density. I'm also going to share with you some of my best tips and tricks on how to work with fine thin hair. But before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you don't miss a tutorial. Now let's go ahead and get started. My model has really fine hair and she also has a little bit of correction needing to be done. You can see she has a little bit of an orange band towards that mid zone. So what we're going to be doing is bringing her highlights up a little bit, correcting that orange band, as well as adding in some lowlights so we can break up some of this really blonde ends that she has going on. So that way her highlights not only pop, but it gives the illusion of added density. So usually what I like to do is pre-section my model. So what you see here is split right down the middle and then leaving that money piece out and then bringing it down from the apex right behind the ear, and then a standard V section starting on the occipital. For her formula, I'm going to be using Kenra Professional Beyond Bond Lightener at a 1:2 mixing ratio with 20 volume developer. And then I'm also going to be adding in some lowlights using Demi Permanent 7NA at a 1:2 mixing ratio with 9 volume developer. I'm also going to be using Nourishing Mask in a bowl just in case I need to apply any treatment to her previously lightened ends since she has a little bit of compromised hair. I'm starting out in the back section and I'm only going to be putting in the highlights for these sections just for demonstration purposes so you can see exactly the sectioning that I'm working with. So since it's already in a slight V section on that occipital, I start out by doing a zigzag slice right underneath the section, and then I'm going to use this Dreamweaver comb from Fremar to weave out the pieces. So basically what this is going to create is kind of like a teasy light. So in addition to using this Cooboard, which is going to push any of those little baby hairs right on up, this is going to allow me to create that rooted highlight look, and then I apply my lightener right onto the hair. So I'm making sure to thoroughly saturate through this entire section, and again, I'm just going to outline these first 3 foils to show you the pattern that we're going to be working with, but what we're going to be doing later is adding in those lowlights, which you're going to continue to do throughout her entire head. Now there are a couple reasons why I decided to start off in the occipital region. Number 1, she does not wear her hair up, so hairline highlights were not necessary. And number 2, I wanted to be able to give the illusion of weight on the bottom section. Therefore, I didn't want to add any highlights on the bottom because when you add too much lightness and brightness on that bottom region, on fine hair specifically, what can happen is it gives that visualization of hollowness throughout the perimeter of the hair. So this was the best option to keep that illusion of fullness by keeping it dark underneath. So now that I got those first 3 sections in, you kind of see this triangular pattern that we're going to be working with, and all I'm doing is taking a slice, which essentially is already somewhat weaved from the Dreamweaver comb that we used, and I'm adding that 7NA lowlight right behind that highlight. So what this is going to do is make sure that those highlights pop, and we're also doing that correction that was needed underneath. Now I could have gone in and just placed this Demi Permanent hair color throughout in between each of her foils, but I decided to just do the low light instead because she did want to maintain some brightness, which we're actually going to add a few hair painted pieces to further correct what she has going on with these orange bands. I'm going to continue on with this triangular pattern of diagonals and horizontals throughout the entire back section. And again, that reason is because I want to maintain that depth. So I'm not really adding in too many highlights, but it's going to look like we did when we're all done here, which you'll see in a little bit. But keeping these pockets of dark and depth is really the key when working with fine hair. Once I'm done with the back section and I get to that last top crown area where the apex is at, I'm gonna change direction a little bit and do my signature pivotal highlight to finish it off. I'm still gonna add in those highlights and lowlights, but the way I do the highlights is gonna change a little bit, so I hope it makes sense. So here I'm just still taking those zigzagged slices and then weaving that. Again, this is gonna give that illusion of that teasy light that we're gonna create without the tease. I'm gonna do my highlight and then put the lowlights still between each of these highlights. But pay attention to how I section each of these highlights. The right side of the pizza slice is going to be a little bit more narrow, and the left side is going to be slightly wider. And as I continue to do this, it's going to pivot, or rather fan out, making the right side the center point. I personally love doing highlights like this right onto the crown area because you cannot tell where the highlights begin or end, and it just looks beautiful and seamless. The only time that I may change the application or the direction of the highlights is if they have a really prominent cowlick. So definitely pay attention to that if you wanted to add brightness or not, but typically if they have a strong cowlick, I try to avoid highlighting right on top of it because I don't want to bring too much attention to that area. So typically I will highlight on the exterior of the cowlick. Another reason why I like this sectioning is because it creates those natural pockets of depth that's needed for fine hair highlights specifically. So once you start seeing how I'm pivoting here, I started off diagonal, but now I'm finishing off horizontal right on top of that section that I created from the apex right on down to the left side. Once I get these in, I'm then gonna add the lowlights in the same manner that we did on the underside. So whether you decide to finish off your section and then put your lowlights or do the highlight and lowlight at the same time, it's totally up to you. I just personally like working this way because it just makes me a little bit more efficient, and it's just the way I've been doing it for a long time. You also don't have to worry about the Demi permanent over depositing. If you are using the proper formulation, it's gonna work perfect and in tandem with your highlights as you work throughout the hair. I also like using Beyond Bond because it is such a great lightener because of the dual bond technology, which is perfect for fragile hair, such as this model right here. And now I'm gonna start working throughout the front, and I wanted to point out that she has a pretty steep widow's peak. So when I add in her really subtle money piece, I'm actually gonna split it in half. So I'm gonna work on the exterior of her natural hairline. I'm doing this by pulling the hair completely up and then weaving those hairs directly down and adding in 2 back-to-backs on each side, making a total of 4 foils just to frame her widow's peak. And again, this is to create a really subtle money piece, nothing super thick or crazy for her. She wanted a little bit of brightness right here throughout the front, but in order to finish off this sectioned out piece, I'm then going to utilize those triangle sections again for that depth, but I'm gonna use that Dreamweaver comb to create that depth for me. So taking that horizontal slice and then weaving that section out, and then you can see I have a really soft, subtle subsection going on. And this is what's going to create that transition from outlining that widow's peak and then highlighting it to blend in with the rest of her hair. In total, we have 6 foils, so 2 for the exterior and then 2 for the interior, and the only ones that have a subsection are the ones on the very, very top. Because this is a money piece, I'm actually not going to be adding the Demi permanent or any dark right here. We're gonna leave those pieces out and just have it naturally brightened here, and I may even tip out those front pieces. For the front hairline, I'm gonna add in 2 back-to-back highlights, so no subsection in between right on that hairline. So I do this by pulling the hair completely up and then weaving it down towards me. And then something to note is that if you want to get really close to the scalp, I'm using the tail end of the comb to weave out my sections myself. When I'm trying to create something that's more rooted, that's where I'm going to take a much thicker section and use the Dreamweaver side of the comb to create those highlights for me, in addition to the Cooboard, giving that illusion of a teasy light without the tease. So once I have those 2 back-to-back highlights put in, this is where I'm going to start introducing my depth. Again, I'm creating that background so that way those front highlights really pop. So this is my 7NA in Demi, and then I'm gonna incorporate my highlight right on top of that. So you can see that I have lots of depth that I'm leaving here right in the front hairline, but not a lot of highlights. I think a lot of times we add in way too many highlights because we think the more highlights we put in, the more we're gonna see them, but that's the complete opposite. The more highlights we put in, the more blended effect we get. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're determining what type of look or finished look you're trying to create. Do you want to see those highlights separated? Do you want them blended? And all of that's going to change depending on the direction you apply them and how much depth you create. I'm going to finish off these last 2 sections in the same exact application that I did in the back. Highlight on top with a low light right behind it, and I'm applying these horizontally because she wears her hair split down the middle and I wanted to create the most blended effect possible. Once her foils were all in, I added a few hair painted pieces specifically to help remove a lot of those orange bands that she had, but I made sure to tip out the ends and only lighten the pieces that made sense. I didn't want to highlight any more of the exterior, so I made sure that any of the hair painted pieces were left for the interior subsections. I decided to use this technique because she wants to stay more on the blonde side, but if she was okay going darker, I would have skipped the lowlights altogether and just added in these highlights and then darkened up the interior. So again, make sure you ask your client what their overall goals are. Since she wanted to be blonde, this was the best route to go. So I'm gonna let her process, and I am mixing up her toner formula. So I decided to do a color melt using 6 NUA in Demi Permanent at a 1:2 with 9 vol, and then I'm gonna blend that right on in to Beige Rapid Toner at a 1:2 mixing ratio with 9 volume developer. I'm leaving about a 2-inch section where her money piece is at right along the hairline out. So I'm actually going to tone that last, and then I'm applying the 6 NUA formula about 2 inches down right throughout the back. The reason why I decided to use 6 NUA is so that way it blends in really beautifully with her natural hair, and it also is going to blend in any gray hairs that she has. It was something that she was a little concerned about. She just had honestly less than 10% gray. But once I got that 6 NUA on throughout her root, I then took a comb and just combed it right on down. And this is also gonna help neutralize any of those orange tones that were left over. She did pull a little warm right at the root, and I found out later that she did use some really dark Demi Permanent prior. So had I known this, I probably would have used a stronger developer for her highlights, but since we're working with what we have here, the 6 NUA is going to be perfect. Once that is on, I'm then going to start my timer for about 10 minutes, and then I'm gonna apply that rapid toner because the rapid toner processes in about 5 minutes or less. So I'm gonna adjust my timing for each of these colors. I'm gonna process this for 20 minutes total room temperature, but once I get that rapid toner on, I only left it on for that 5 minutes, which is why you want to start your timer as soon as you're done with the dark color melt formula or your 6 NUA. And here's the final result of highlights on fine hair. And just to give you a little recap, I used Beyond Bond Lightener at a 1:2 mixing ratio with 20 volume developer, and used Demi Permanent 7NA for that low light, and then did a final color melt using Demi Permanent 6 NUA and blending that right into Beige Rapid Toner. And you can see that her hair looks like it has lots of fullness because we have that dark hair underneath, giving us the illusion of fullness around the perimeter.
So I really hope you enjoyed this hair tutorial, and if you did, please give this video a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe and comment down below what your favorite part of this entire tutorial was, and I'll be sure to respond. You can also find me on my other social channels like Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, all under Morella Manelli. And if you love listening to podcasts, be sure to check out my podcast called Hair B&B. It's a podcast where I help hairstylists just like you simplify styling, color, and your beauty biz. For more free education, be sure to head on over to my website and sign up for my email list so that way you can get free EDU sent right to your inbox. And finally, be sure to check out my other hair tutorials right here on this channel, and I will see you next time.